When I bought the house, people in town called it the palace. It wasn't technically a palace, of course, but with its marble staircase, crystal chandeliers, and iron gates that opened like something out of a movie, it felt like one. I signed every document with my own name. Every dollar came from my business long nights, double shifts, and years of sacrifice. My husband, Daniel, had always said he was between opportunities. His parents lived in a cramped apartment, constantly complaining about rent, neighbors, noise, life. I thought giving them space would bring us closer. I thought generosity would build loyalty. So when the closing papers were finalized, I surprised them. "We're all moving in," I said, sliding the gold key across the table. His mother cried. His father hugged me stiffly. Daniel smiled in a way that looked proud, but now, when I replay that moment, it looks more like victory. For a year, I paid everything: property taxes, utilities, landscaping, renovations. I even furnished a guest wing, specifically for his parents so they could feel comfortable. Slowly, though, things began to shift. Daniel started calling it our family home when speaking to his relatives. His mother redecorated the living room without asking me. His father began introducing himself to neighbors as the owner. I brushed it off at first. I told myself it was harmless pride. Then one afternoon, after returning from a business trip, I pulled into my own driveway and my key didn't work. The security code had been changed. I stood there with my suitcase, staring at the locked iron gate. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "We need space. It's better if you stay somewhere else for now." Somewhere else. In the house I bought. I called. No answer. I knocked. Curtains shifted upstairs, but no one opened the door. That was the moment something inside me hardened. They thought I was emotional. They thought I would cry, beg, and disappear. Instead, I got in my car, drove to a hotel, and opened my laptop. Because if they wanted to play games with my palace, I was about to remind them whose name was on the deed. That night in the hotel, I didn't cry. I ordered black coffee, spread the closing documents across the bed, and read every line slowly. My name, mine alone, was printed clearly on the deed. No co-signer, no shared ownership. Daniel had never contributed $1 to the down payment. His parents weren't mentioned anywhere. Legally, the palace belonged to me. Emotionally, that was another story. The next morning, I drove back not to argue but to observe. From across the street, I watched movers carry in new furniture. My mother-in-law stood on the porch giving instructions, like she was hosting a grand reopening. I walked up calmly. Daniel opened the door halfway. He didn't look guilty. He looked annoyed. "You can't just show up," he said. I blinked. "It's my house. It's our family home now." His mother interrupted from behind him. "You're always traveling. You're never here. This is what's best." Best for who? They had already changed the alarm system. The security company confirmed. Someone claiming to be homeowner Daniel Harper authorized it. I almost laughed. The audacity was impressive. When I stepped forward, Daniel blocked the doorway. "You're making this messy," he said quietly. "Just let us live here. We'll figure out the paperwork later." Paperwork later. That sentence told me everything. They thought possession was power. That if they stayed long enough, if they blurred the lines long enough, somehow the house would become theirs by default. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I simply nodded. "Okay," I said softly. "We'll figure it out properly." That night, I scheduled a consultation with a property attorney. I brought every receipt, every wire transfer confirmation, every email from the builder. When the lawyer finished reviewing everything, she leaned back in her chair. "They locked you out of your own property?" "Yes." She smiled slightly. "Good. That makes this easier." That was the moment I realized something important. They hadn't erased me. They had handed me the strongest case imaginable. My attorney didn't waste time. Within 48 hours, a formal notice was drafted and delivered, certified mail, signature required. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't dramatic. It was cold, precise, and devastating. Unauthorized occupancy, illegal lockout, fraudulent misrepresentation to a security provider. Big words, heavy consequences. Daniel called me the same evening they received it. "What is this?" he demanded. "It's a notice," I replied evenly. "You have 7 days to vacate my property." "You're seriously taking this to court?" "You already did," I said, "when you changed the locks." His mother left me a voicemail 30 minutes later, crying loudly about how I was destroying the family. Funny how protecting what's legally yours becomes destruction when someone else benefits from it. But they still didn't leave. Instead, they doubled down. Daniel filed for separation and tried to claim the house was a marital asset. His father suddenly claimed he had contributed renovation labor. His mother told neighbors, I had abandoned the home. They were building a story. Unfortunately for them, I had built a paper trail. Bank statements showing every payment came from my personal business account, established before my marriage. Emails confirming I alone signed the mortgage. Even text messages from Daniel admitting he wasn't financially stable at the time of purchase. My attorney prepared everything like a chess master arranging pieces before checkmate. The court hearing was scheduled 3 weeks later. When the day arrived, I wore a simple navy suit. No dramatic makeup, no tears, just composure. Daniel arrived with his parents, looking confident, almost smug, until the judge started asking questions. Mr. Harper, can you provide documentation proving financial contribution to the purchase? Silence. Do you have written authorization permitting you to change security access to a property solely titled under your wife's name? More silence. The courtroom air shifted. For the first time since that day at the gate, I saw uncertainty in Daniel's eyes. His father avoided looking at the judge. His mother clutched her purse like it might save her. Possession isn't ownership, and the deed never lies. When the judge announced a temporary order restoring me immediate access to my property, I didn't smile. I simply breathed, because this wasn't over. It was just the beginning of their collapse. The temporary order was signed that afternoon, effective immediately. The judge said firmly, the titled owner is to be granted full access. Any continued obstruction will result in penalties. Penalties. That word echoed. 2 sheriff's deputies accompanied me to the house the next morning. Not because I was afraid, but because the court wanted witnesses. When the iron gates opened, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not anger, grief. The garden I had designed was overgrown. The fountain was off. My custom patio furniture had been replaced with something cheap and gaudy. It didn't look like neglect. It looked like erasure. Daniel opened the door before we even knocked. His jaw tightened when he saw the deputies. This is unnecessary, he muttered. No, one deputy replied calmly. This is lawful. I stepped inside slowly. The marble floor still shined, but the air felt different, heavy, tense. His mother stood in the living room, arms crossed. His father lingered near the staircase like he was guarding territory. This is humiliating, she snapped. What was humiliating? I answered softly. Was being locked out of my own home. The deputies handed Daniel the official enforcement copy. They explained clearly, I had immediate access. Any interference would be documented. I walked upstairs first. My bedroom door had been converted into a guest suite. My clothes were boxed and shoved into a storage closet. My office had been turned into Daniel's study. The irony almost made me laugh. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I simply took photos. Every room, every alteration, every personal item displaced. Documentation mattered now more than emotion. When I reached a balcony overlooking the backyard, I finally allowed myself a steady breath. I wasn't begging to come home. I had returned by law. Before leaving that day, I turned to Daniel. You have until the final hearing, I said evenly. After that, you won't just be leaving voluntarily. His father scoffed. You wouldn't dare. I met his eyes without blinking. I already did. The final court date was set for 6 weeks later. And this time, it wouldn't be temporary. The 6 weeks before the final hearing were louder than I expected. Not legally, emotionally. Daniel suddenly became the wounded husband. He posted vague quotes online about betrayal and gold diggers who marry for status. The irony was almost poetic. His mother told extended family I was mentally unstable. His father hinted that I had promised them ownership verbally. Verbal promises don't override notarized deeds. Still, rumors travel faster than facts. Neighbors who once waved now avoided eye contact. One even asked gently if I was okay after abandoning the house. Abandoning. I kept my responses simple. The court will clarify everything. Behind the scenes, my attorney prepared something far stronger than gossip evidence of intent. Security company records showed Daniel falsely identified himself as sole homeowner when changing the alarm system. Text messages revealed conversations between him and his parents discussing how long they needed to stay before it would look permanent. Permanent. They weren't confused. They were strategic. And strategy leaves footprints. 2 weeks before the hearing, I received an email from Daniel's attorney proposing a settlement. If I transferred partial ownership, they would agree to drop claims of marital property disputes. In other words, give us what we tried to steal, and we'll stop fighting. I declined within the hour. When the final hearing arrived, the courtroom felt different from the first time. Less uncertainty, more inevitability. The judge reviewed financial records first, then security fraud documentation, then communications showing clear planning. At one point, the judge looked directly at Daniel. You understood this property was not in your name? Yes, he admitted quietly. And you changed access without consent? Silence. His father tried to speak but was immediately reminded he was not a titled owner. His mother's earlier confidence had evaporated completely. The narrative they built outside the courtroom collapsed inside it. By the time the judge called for a recess before the ruling, I already knew how this would end. They hadn't just underestimated me. They underestimated the power of patience. When the judge returned, the courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. I kept my hands folded in my lap, calm, steady, focused. I hadn't fought with emotion. I had fought with documentation. The ruling began with facts. The property located at, the judge read the address of my so-called palace, is solely titled under the petitioner's name. Financial records confirm exclusive contribution to the purchase and maintenance of said property. Exclusive. Every syllable landed like a hammer. The judge continued, outlining Daniel's unauthorized actions, changing security credentials under false representation, denying lawful access to the titled owner, and attempting to assert occupancy rights without legal basis. Then came the part that made Daniel shift uncomfortably in his seat. This court finds the respondents acted in bad faith. Bad faith. That wasn't just losing. That was condemnation. The order was clear. Immediate vacating of the property within 10 days. Any failure would result in enforced eviction by the county. Additionally, Daniel was ordered to cover my legal fees. His father and mother were formally warned for participating in unlawful interference and misrepresentation. And then the final line. The petitioner is entitled to exclusive possession and protection of her property. The court will not tolerate attempts to dispossess a lawful owner through manipulation or deception. It was over. Daniel didn't look at me as we stood. His mother's face was pale. His father muttered something about appeals, but even his tone lacked conviction. Appeals require grounds. They had none. Outside the courthouse, reporters weren't waiting. There was no applause, no cinematic moment, just sunlight. Daniel finally spoke. You didn't have to go this far. I turned slowly. Neither did you. 10 days later, a moving truck sat in the driveway. I watched from the balcony as boxes were loaded carefully, quietly. No dramatic shouting this time. No declarations of ownership. The gates closed behind them in silence. When the house was finally empty, I walked through each room alone. The walls still stood. The marble still gleamed. But something inside me had changed permanently. I hadn't just won back a house. I had reclaimed myself. And for the first time since I handed over that golden key, the palace truly felt like mine again. The first night alone in the house felt unfamiliar. Not because it was empty, but because it was peaceful. For over a year, every room had carried tension. Whispered conversations, closed-door meetings, the subtle shift of control I had ignored for far too long. Now, the silence was clean. I walked through the foyer barefoot, letting my fingers brush against the marble banister. The chandelier lights reflected off the polished floors like nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. Houses remember. The guest wing his parents once occupied felt smaller without their presence. Their heavy furniture had left scratches along the hardwood. The living room walls still bore nail holes from pictures I never approved. Erasure leaves marks. I hired a locksmith the next morning, not to change the locks they had already been restored to my authority, but to upgrade everything. New biometric system, cameras sync directly to my phone, private security monitoring under my name only. No more shared codes, no more blurred lines. Daniel sent one final message that week. "You've made your point. I hope you're happy." I stared at it for a long moment before deleting it. Happiness wasn't the point. Justice was. Boundaries were. Word traveled quickly after the ruling. The same neighbors who once avoided me now offered awkward smiles. One even apologized for misunderstanding the situation. I accepted politely. I didn't need validation. The court had already given me that. But the real shift wasn't outside. It was internal. I stopped questioning whether I had been too generous, too trusting, too accommodating. Generosity isn't weakness, but ignoring red flags is. I found documents Daniel had left behind in a drawer draft. Notes discussing refinancing, options under his name, plans, calculations. Quiet. Ambition built on my foundation. That discovery didn't hurt. It clarified. They hadn't acted out of confusion. They had acted out of entitlement. And entitlement collapses when confronted with law and patience. That weekend, I hosted a small dinner. Close friends, business partners, people who had supported me quietly through everything. Laughter filled the dining hall again. Real laughter. As I stood at the head of the table, I realized something profound. They thought removing me from my house would diminish me. Instead, it revealed exactly who I was. And this time, the gates weren't just closed. They were guarded. Winning the house was only half the battle. The marriage itself had become a shell, hollow, performative, and impossible to repair. Daniel filed for divorce shortly after the court ruling, likely hoping to regain some leverage. He underestimated me again, because while he was focused on the house, I had been quietly protecting everything else. My business had been established years before we married. The investments, the accounts, the intellectual property, all documented and legally structured as separate assets. I never imagined I'd need that protection against my own husband. But foresight has a strange way of rewarding you. During mediation, Daniel attempted one last narrative shift. I supported her emotionally, he told the mediator. I sacrificed my own career so she could grow hers. Sacrificed. I almost admired the creativity. Financial statements told a different story. I had covered household expenses entirely. I had paid off his credit cards twice. I had even funded a startup idea that quietly dissolved within 6 months. Sacrifice wasn't the word. Dependency was. His parents tried to insert themselves again, claiming I had humiliated the family publicly. The mediator gently reminded them they were not parties to the divorce. The final settlement was clean. No spousal support. No division of my business assets. Daniel left with what he entered the marriage with: very little. When the judge finalized the divorce, I didn't feel victorious. I felt clear. There's a difference. A week later, I received a certified letter. Daniel had attempted to appeal the earlier property ruling. It was denied almost immediately. No new evidence. No legal missteps. Just wounded pride trying to repackage itself as injustice. I framed the denial notice not out of spite, but as a reminder, not of revenge, of resilience. The palace felt different now. Lighter. Mine in a way it had never been before. Even when I first bought it, ownership isn't just paperwork. It's presence. One evening, I stood on the balcony watching the sunset bleed across the sky. The same balcony where I once questioned everything. Now, there was no doubt left. They had tried to erase me from my own foundation. Instead, they built the strongest version of me possible. And this time, there would be no one standing at the gates pretending it belonged to them. With Daniel and his family permanently out, I finally allowed myself to breathe in the house I had earned. But I didn't want it to just be a victory monument. I wanted it to feel alive again, my sanctuary, my palace, truly mine. I started small. The garden needed care. I hired a landscaper I trusted and personally supervised every detail. Roses planted where Daniel's mother had torn out my orchids. The fountain repaired, sparkling like glass in the sunlight. I even added a small koi pond at the far end, something I had always dreamed of but had been too distracted to create. Inside, the changes were subtle but significant. I replaced the guest suite furniture with minimalist designs. My office got new bookshelves, arranged just the way I liked. I reinstalled my paintings, each stroke reminding me that nothing taken from me could erase my choices, my taste, my life. Neighbors began noticing. A few stopped by with gentle congratulations, curious smiles, or even just compliments on the garden. It was as if the house itself was whispering, "You belong here." I began hosting gatherings again, not to impress or assert dominance, but to reclaim joy that had been stolen from me. Laughter echoed through the halls, clinking glasses, conversations overlapping in warmth. I had built a life here, and finally, it was returning to its natural rhythm. Evenings became my favorite time. I would stand on the balcony with a glass of wine, the city lights flickering below, and reflect on how calm the palace felt without manipulation, without hidden agendas lurking in every corner. Daniel's name no longer held power over me. His family's whispers were distant echoes. I wasn't defined by the chaos they had caused. One night, as I walked through the now pristine corridors, I paused in the hallway where Daniel had once blocked my path. I touched a banister lightly, a quiet acknowledgement to myself. You didn't just reclaim a house, you reclaimed your life. The palace was mine not because of walls or locks, but because I had asserted myself with patience, strategy, and clarity. And for the first time in over a year, I allowed myself to feel completely safe in my own home. No one could take this from me, not by charm, coercion, or deceit. This was my victory, quiet but unshakable. And as I turned toward the dining room, I realized something else. This house was no longer just a palace. It was a fortress, not of stone or gates, but of boundaries, resilience, and the knowledge that I would never allow anyone to erase me again. For several weeks, life returned to a rhythm that felt almost sacred. No locked doors, no whispered plots, no texts that made my stomach knot. Just quiet mornings with coffee on the balcony, afternoons working in my office, and evenings tending the garden. And yet, peace has a way of being tested. One Thursday morning, a familiar sound made me freeze, someone knocking sharply on the front gates. I walked over calmly, expecting perhaps a delivery or maintenance crew. But when I pressed the intercom, I recognized the voice immediately. "Open the door! We need to talk," Daniel said. I didn't respond. "Come on. We can fix this. It doesn't have to be messy," he continued, his tone edged with that same false charm he had perfected over the years. I stepped back from the intercom and pressed a button to alert security cameras. Every word he said, every gesture would be documented. I wasn't going to fall for intimidation again. He pounded once, twice. I heard a car door slam. He and his mother were driving off, but the intent had been clear: to provoke, to unsettle. I didn't chase them. I didn't panic. I simply documented the incident and filed a notice with my attorney. The law had already sided with me, and this attempt to test boundaries only strengthened my position. Later that day, I sat in my office reviewing the security footage. Daniel's body language, the way his mother leaned out of the car window, the veiled anger, it all told the same story they had tried before: entitlement, frustration, and disbelief that their schemes had failed. I allowed myself a small smile. They hadn't learned, but I had. For the first time, I truly understood the depth of my own strength. The palace wasn't just a house anymore. It was a testament to strategy, patience, and unshakable self-respect. That night, I lit the fireplace in the living room and poured a glass of wine. I walked slowly through each room, my footsteps echoing softly. This time, it wasn't just about reclaiming a home. It was about maintaining it, protecting it, guarding not just the marble floors and crystal chandeliers, but the boundaries I had fought so hard to enforce. And as I watched the flames dance, I realized something powerful. Real revenge isn't loud or vindictive. It's calm, deliberate, and lasting. And mine was just beginning. After Daniel's failed attempt at intimidation, word traveled quickly among his circle and beyond. Family members who had once whispered doubts about me began to realize something. I wasn't someone to manipulate. I wasn't fragile or sentimental in ways that could be exploited. I was deliberate, prepared, and unshakable. The ripple effect was subtle at first. Former friends of Daniel's parents, who had once visited my home without invitation, stopped calling. Their curiosity turned to caution. Neighbors who had hesitated to speak now greeted me openly, but carefully. Even local business associates began reaching out, not with sympathy, but with respect for how I had handled the entire ordeal. I noticed a change most vividly during a charity gala I hosted at the palace. The same rooms that had once echoed with whispers of entitlement were now alive with admiration and genuine conversation. Guests marveled at the gardens, the interiors, the sense of order and purpose. And then there were the quiet moments, alone in the house. I found small signs that Daniel's presence had left its mark not in ownership, but in clarity. The office desk, which had been cluttered with his discarded papers, now felt like mine again. I organized every drawer, every shelf, every file with intention, reclaiming space that had been infiltrated by entitlement. A particularly powerful moment came when I found a box of old letters and receipts Daniel had left behind. I read them carefully, cataloged them, and then set them aside, not for revenge but as proof. Proof that even when someone attempts to rewrite history, the truth endures. It became clear that my victory was no longer just about the house. It was about perception, legacy, and influence. People would remember who had fought fairly, legally, and patiently. They would remember who had reclaimed not just a building, but dignity and authority. By the end of the month, I had even started hosting small meetings in my office for local entrepreneurs. Business deals were happening in the very rooms Daniel once claimed as his study. I realized something. My power wasn't just offensive anymore. It was generative. The palace, once a symbol of what I had lost, had transformed into a center of control, prosperity, and vision. And every time I walked through the halls, I reminded myself quietly, those who try to erase you create the strongest record of your resilience. Daniel and his family had been the architects of their own downfall, and I was living in the masterpiece they never anticipated. By now, the palace was fully mine again, not just physically, but spiritually. Every room, every hallway, every detail reflected my ownership and my boundaries. Yet, I knew that those who once tried to take from me rarely accept defeat gracefully. One Friday evening, I received a letter from Daniel's attorney. No appeals this time. No excuses. Just a veiled threat. They were considering further action, and would not hesitate to involve authorities again over minor property disputes. I read it calmly, then set it on my desk. My attorney called immediately and assured me it was baseless. Daniel and his parents had no legal grounds to challenge anything anymore. Any attempt to harass or intimidate would be documented and punished. I realized something crucial in that moment. They were no longer a threat, they were a warning. The palace wasn't just a home. It was a statement. And statements have consequences. I decided to make the warning permanent. Not through anger, not through confrontation, but through boundaries so firm that even the memory of their previous attempts would carry weight. I upgraded the security system further, installed biometric locks in every private room, and ensured that all entrances were monitored. I placed legal notices on the property records and sent certified letters to Daniel and his parents, confirming that any trespassing or interference would result in immediate legal action. But the most important change wasn't physical, it was internal. I stopped doubting myself, stopped wondering if I had been too generous, stopped questioning whether I had acted too calmly while they overstepped. I understood now. Patience, preparation, and clarity were more powerful than rage. That night, I walked through the grand hall, touching the marble staircase railing, feeling the weight of my choices. Every careful decision, every documented email, every attorney consultation had led me here. I lit the fireplace and poured myself a glass of wine. The flames reflected in the chandeliers, glittering like jewels. But the sparkle wasn't the house's, it was mine. In that quiet moment, I knew something Daniel and his family could never take from me. Control, authority, respect turned through strategy, not manipulation. The palace wasn't just a building I had bought anymore. It was a fortress built from resilience. And anyone who ever tried to erase me would remember not my anger, not my revenge, but the unshakable calm that reclaimed everything they thought they could steal. I smiled to myself, finally at peace. The warning was complete. And this time, it wasn't a threat. It was reality. Months passed, and the palace settled into a rhythm I had never fully appreciated before. Morning sunlight spilled across the marble floors. Birds chirped in the gardens I had redesigned. and my office became a command center for both my business and personal life. Daniel and his family had disappeared from the neighborhood. Rumors circulated that they had moved far away, nursing bruised pride and reconsidering their entitlement strategies. I didn't follow their movements. I didn't need to. Their absence was proof enough of my victory. Yet, echoes of their presence remained. I would occasionally find remnants of the chaos they had caused: nail holes, a scratched banister, or an old piece of furniture that didn't belong. Each time, I paused, documented it, and then restored it to perfection. It was almost meditative, like rewriting a story they had tried to narrate without my consent. The most satisfying echoes came from the people who had once doubted me. Neighbors, friends, even local business owners began approaching me with newfound respect. They would say things like, "I've never seen someone handle that with such composure," or, "You really showed them who's in charge." And it wasn't just about the house anymore, it was about authority, integrity, and the unshakable presence of someone who refused to be erased. One afternoon, I hosted a small gathering for a charity I had long supported. The palace was alive with laughter, music, and warmth. In the corner of my mind, I reflected on the contrast between that evening and the first night I had returned. Back then, tension had hung in the air like a storm cloud. Now, the air was clear, electric with the satisfaction of justice served. I realized something profound. Daniel and his family had attempted to rewrite history by erasing me. They failed not because of luck, or theatrics, or public sympathy. They failed because I refused to be erased. Every legal document, every calculated move, every ounce of patience had culminated in a truth that no amount of manipulation could undo. As I stood on the balcony that evening, looking out over the city lights, I finally allowed myself a quiet, private smile. Not a triumphant smile, not a vengeful one, a smile of clarity, of power regained, of life reclaimed. They had tried to take my palace. They had tried to take my dignity. But in the end, the only thing that truly mattered was that I had never lost myself. And in this palace, my palace, they would never return. Ever. Winter settled over the palace, casting long shadows across the gardens I had meticulously restored. Snow dusted the marble terraces, turning the house into a quiet fortress of white. It was beautiful, serene, mine. For the first time in over 2 years, I could move freely through every room without hesitation. No hidden cameras monitored my actions. No whispered plans plotted in secret. No threats or intimidation lurking in the corners. The house was not just a home, it was a monument to patience, strategy, and resilience. The final proof of closure came quietly. One morning, I received a notice from the local county office confirming that Daniel's last attempts at legal interference had been permanently denied. No appeals, no loopholes, no lingering threats. Everything was finalized. The court had drawn a line, and it was absolute. I walked through the living room slowly, running my hand across the polished surfaces. I thought of all the times I had doubted myself, all the moments I had questioned whether I should have been more forceful, more dramatic. And I realized something. The calmest victories are the ones that last. The ones that leave no question of ownership, integrity, or strength. In the library, I pulled out a journal I had kept throughout the ordeal. I had written my thoughts, my fears, my strategy, and every step of the legal process. Flipping through the pages, I felt a sense of completeness. Not revenge born of malice, but justice executed with precision. That evening, I stood on the balcony and looked at the city lights twinkling like stars. The wind carried the faint scent of the winter roses I had planted, flowers that had survived the chaos and flourished under care, just like me. I smiled, not with triumph, but with serenity. Daniel, his parents, the false narratives, the broken trust, they were all behind me. Every attempt to erase me had only reinforced who I was. This palace, my palace, was no longer a symbol of what was lost. It was a testament to what I had reclaimed: my home, my dignity, and my life. The gates were locked, the alarm system monitored, and I knew without doubt that no one could take any of it from me again. I poured myself a glass of wine and raised it silently to the empty halls. To patience, to justice, to resilience. The house was mine, the life was mine, and finally, I felt the weight of the past lift. This chapter had ended not with noise, not with chaos, but with quiet, unshakable victory. I was home, truly home. Spring arrived, bringing light and warmth that the palace hadn't felt in over a year. The gardens bloomed vividly, a kaleidoscope of colors I had carefully cultivated, each flower a reminder of patience rewarded. The marble floors reflected the sun like liquid gold, and the chandeliers sparkled brighter than ever. The house wasn't just restored, it had evolved into a living symbol of triumph. I moved through the rooms with quiet pride, knowing every detail, every choice. Every decision was mine alone. No one could walk these halls and claim authority over me again. The echoes of Daniel and his family were gone, replaced by the laughter of friends I invited over. The soft hum of music, the comforting rhythm of my life finally aligned with my space. Even the memories that once carried pain now felt like lessons. The locked doors, the betrayal, the whispered plots, they were all threads woven into a story I had mastered. They hadn't broken me, they had forged me. I found myself in the study, sitting at the desk where Daniel had once tried to impose his will. I opened a notebook and wrote a single line, a message to myself: never let anyone define your home, your life, or your worth. The palace had become more than a house. It was a fortress of clarity, resilience, and unshakable boundaries. Every lock, every camera, every rule reinforced the truth I had always known. Ownership isn't just legal, it's presence, attention, and vigilance. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I stepped onto the balcony overlooking the city. The golden glow reflected off the glass panes, and the wind carried the faint scent of blooming roses. I felt an unexpected peace settle over me. The struggle, the betrayal, the legal battles, they were all behind me now. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine the life that could have been if I hadn't acted, if I had let them erase me, if I had been naive again. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I had faced that future, and I had chosen differently. The palace wasn't just mine legally, it was mine emotionally, spiritually, and strategically. Every inch of it reflected the life I had built, the strength I had claimed, and the boundaries I had enforced. I raised a glass to the empty halls, to the quiet strength that had carried me through, to the resilience that no betrayal could ever touch. They had tried to erase me. They had failed. And in that failure, I discovered the most powerful truth. The palace and my life was mine, forever. The story ends not with revenge, but with victory, calm, and an unshakable claim to everything I had earned. The gates were closed. The house was secure. I was home,